All right, we'll dive in. Welcome to creating reusable installation profiles in Drupal 8. That's actually not what this is at all. This is user onboarding and the Legend of Zelda. I am Brian Perry. Brian Perry on Drupal.org, Bry Comedy on Twitter, and most importantly, Wa Brian on the Nintendo Network, if you want to play some games. So I work for a company called HS2 Solutions in the Chicago area. And if you're looking to do some great Drupal work with some great Drupalists, or need great Drupal work done, we have a nice Drupal practice, among other things, so definitely get in touch. But we are going to talk quite a bit about video games in this session, unsurprisingly. So this is a little tiny, like, stand-up Pac-Man arcade game. Not the full thing, but the little tiny thing. And it's what I asked for Christmas, I think, when I was like 6 years old. One of my neighborhood friends had this, and I wanted specifically this little Pac-Man thing. And instead, I got an Atari 2600 for Christmas. And as the ungrateful child that I still am to this day, I was really pissed for a while because I wanted this Pac-Man machine. But then I realized that my Atari 2600 could play a bunch of different games. And it helped me love video games. And video games helped me get into computers. And we got a Windows 3.1 machine in our house. And I started doing basic programming and then web development. And all of that tangentially brings me into the Drupal community where I am here right now. So thanks, Tiny Pac-Man Machine. All the way to my 6-year-old son. We happen to live near the only exclusively Pac-Man themed restaurant in the world, I believe. It's in Schaumburg, Illinois, level 257, and they now have a Pac-Man museum in the entrance, and striking some goofy poses with this gigantic Duplo Pac-Man. And this is us at the Chicago Nintendo Switch preview event. We were very excited. So I've, whether intentionally or not, certainly passed it down. So this talk is not going to be very Drupal specific at all. This may be the most Drupal-y slide I have. We're going to focus on the concept of onboarding. So user onboarding for your website or your application. But we're also going to look through that through the lens of the Legend of Zelda series. So we're also going to think about what that means from the concept of onboarding a player into their game experience. So this is from useronboard.com, which must be the #1 source on user onboarding. But it says, user onboarding is the process of increasing the likelihood that new users become successful when adopting your product. So I think the thing to drill in and think about a little bit there is, really what successful means. The heavy question, what is success? So it kind of depends on exactly what your website is, or what your app is, or what your product is, what the idea of success is when you're onboarding somebody. It might be as simple as driving somebody to create a user account. It might be making them aware of what sort of content is available on the site and make it easy for them to find it. For a more complex application, it's helping them understand how to use the application, giving them that feeling that this is actually a tool that is going to be useful to them, that they can be successfully using it, that they understand why they would want to use this thing, because you want them to stay around, you want them to stay engaged, you want them to come back. And if they can't figure out how to start using it, can't figure out how to create an account, any of those things, if there's friction in that process, they're not going to feel successful. So taking this quote and thinking about how it applies to video games, I would tweak it like this, that player onboarding is the process of increasing the likelihood that new players become immersed in the game world. So for me, the success in this scenario is stripping away the things that make it feel like a game, or when you can clearly feel the strings being pulled to teach you the mechanics of a game, when you're in like some sort of obvious tutorial, things like that. getting to the point where somebody is really immersed in the game, experiencing the world of the game, it often is going to mean just having fun playing the game. It might be being really engaged in the concept of winning, feeling some sort of challenge there, but definitely getting past the whole idea of like learning and figuring out how to play this game or having that feeling of it being gamey. I think helps with immersion in this case. So we are going to look at the kind of player onboarding process in the games in the Legend of Zelda series. And we'll also compare them to some onboarding experiences on websites and web apps as well. There are very many Legend of Zelda games, but we're going to focus on a few that I think represent some common themes in the Zelda games. So the first one is the original Legend of Zelda game. So we are going to just dive in for a few of these and actually play. We're covering for the inevitability that me constantly switching things is going to break stuff. But so we had the title screen up for a second, and then I didn't even remember this until going back to these games recently. But if you let the title screen go on for a little bit, there is a scroll that gives you some information about what you're trying to do. You're trying to defeat Ganon, find the 7 pieces of the Triforce, Zelda's been kidnapped, all that in that scroll. But that is potentially relevant context that helps you understand what this game is about. I would say that most people probably aren't going to see that. So now we'll dive in and start a game here. First off, how many people have played the original Legend of Zelda before? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, pretty good, excellent. So, this is an early Nintendo game. It's come a long way since this, but there really isn't a lot of context as far as like what you're supposed to do here. You're in the middle of this empty space. There's a couple different directions you should go. Oddly enough, you're not even facing the screen. Your back is to the screen. That certainly could be construed as a subtle hint as far as what to do. Putting myself in the shoes of somebody who is playing this for the first time, I would probably just go straight and go up here, and then I see these guys and realize that I have absolutely no way to defeat them, so I run away again. And now I might notice that there's this very conspicuous door that's been there the whole time, and go see what that's all about. And there's this guy down here in this cave, standing in between these 2 lit fires, that's going to give me a sword. It's dangerous to go alone, so I'll grab the sword. I definitely know at this point that I need a weapon, so I might want to go back to where I came from and exact my revenge against these guys. Oh, look. Little diamond. Alright, I'm going to get all of them, because I need to exact all of my revenge. And now I see another door. I can go in this door. And now this person is willing to sell me things. I have 1 coin, and that's a lot more expensive than that. So I'll go out. So, that's obviously just the first couple of minutes of playing that game. But the basic idea, so you don't really get a lot of guidance as far as what to do when you start out in the beginning of this game. It's kind of on you to go explore and figure out what you're supposed to do. Hopefully you'll end up in that section, that the door that has a sword, because you're not going to get too far without that. But while I think it's on the player a lot in that situation, for me it does quickly get into some sort of feedback loop that's fun, where I go up to this screen, I figure out what's there, I might destroy the enemies there, and then I find a door that I can go into, I realize that I can buy things, later on I continue that process and start getting into dungeons and more interesting areas. So while it's basically invented by the player, it still is an interesting feedback loop that it presents. So the next game that we'll look at is the Super Nintendo Zelda game, A Link to the Past. So we'll just dive into that guy as well. We're going to skip over Zelda 2 for a lot of reasons. Most people skip over Zelda 2. It's kind of the unwanted redesign of the Zelda series, I would say. But, so we'll just jump back to the beginning here. And now thinking about the experience that we just had, in the first couple minutes of the original Legend of Zelda, we can look at some of the changes that were made here. So after we look at this cool Triforce animation, give it a second to go. There's definitely another situation where if we let the title screen keep loading, we'll see another crawl or animation that gives us some context on exactly what we're supposed to be doing in this game. It's a little bit more dramatic. There's more going on than just text. We'll eventually see some fancy battles and things. It's definitely way more verbose than what we saw before. But again, I would worry that most people aren't going to take this in or sit through all of this information. It does provide some context for the game and the overall quest that you have and all that good stuff. But I'm not going to make everybody sit through that. So we'll start our game here. And I think I'm in bed. Please help me. I'm a prisoner in the dungeon of the castle. My name is Zelda. Okay, Zelda is speaking to me, dumping a whole lot of information on me right at the beginning of the game. There are missing girls. Someone has seized control of the castle. And she's in the dungeon of the castle. Please help me. So right away when you start the game, in this case, you're given really specific instructions. Help, I'm captured, go here and do this, which is an interesting contrast to what you don't get in the beginning of the original Zelda game. And then there's this weird guy who politely leaves. So you can get out of bed. There's a treasure chest here. You would assume that that probably is relevant. I have the lamp now. Great. So I go outside, and more space than just the room that I was in. It's raining, which is kind of cool. Let's say I'm going to go down here. Nope. Can't go this way. Go home, little kid. And then there's these guys over here. They're going to tell me the same thing. So, when you leave your house, you have the feeling that there's a larger world for you to explore, and eventually you're going to get to that. But right now, it's pretty on rails. They need you to do this one particular thing to advance the story, so they're going to force you in that direction. Well, maybe I'll just go in the front door of the castle. No. Gotta go home. So I'll follow this path around the side. And there's eventually a pretty conspicuous endpoint to the path here. And if it wasn't obvious enough, Zelda is telling me I'm in the dungeon of the castle. There's a hidden path for you to find, and it's over by the garden. So they're definitely not leaving it up to chance this time. They're giving you a really direct path, forcing you to go a specific way. So depending on the type of player that you are, that might feel a little overly hand-holding. It might feel more comfortable. It really kind of depends on what player you are, but it's definitely a different approach to introducing you to this game world. And then there's this guy who left your house who just happens to be willing to immediately give you a shield and a sword. So you're led in a really specific direction, and you know exactly where to go, and you have more of the tools that you need. For better or for worse. I think that approach might not necessarily be the right one for everyone, but in contrast to the original Zelda, it's definitely very different. So let's actually swap over here and look at an onboarding experience with some of that information in mind. And I kind of lied when I said that was the most Drupal-y slide that we were going to have before. I don't know, I kind of didn't want to, but we kind of have to look at the Drupal.org onboarding experience in this case. And I know that I hadn't experienced that in a very long time. I would imagine either people that are in this talk have probably done it very recently or a very long time ago. But it was interesting to revisit, especially thinking of some of these different ways to look at being introduced to an experience. So this is once you're driven to create an account. This is your create an account page, a form to provide your username, email, all that good stuff. This is pretty familiar and common. Not the flashiest thing in the world, but definitely gets the job done, so that's great. And then our second screen here tells us that we were sent a welcome email. There's more information we can put about our profile. It's even getting a little bit friendly, saying welcome up there. This is all pretty normal and common and fine. And then when we submit that page, we are brought to this page that says, where is the Drupal community? With some information about the image that we uploaded, and then another thing that tells us that we need to verify our email account. And then as of recently, there's a blurb about community discussions, that if we're new to the community, we might not really understand what that is or why that's so important. But thankfully, the page has no known problems. So, it's definitely not what I expected going back to see this. Thinking about what our quest is, apparently it's to find the Drupal community. So I thought maybe if I validated my email address, it would be a little bit different what I experienced. And I'm brought to the place that you get dumped in where you log in, and it's really not much better. There's many different things that you can do here, a bunch of different tabs. But if you're really new, you might not know what those things are. And it's really not all that clear, like, what is the thing that you should be driven to do. It's a little bit more original Legend of Zelda than Link to the Past in this case. Maybe I'm supposed to become a member of the Drupal Association, or maybe I'm supposed to become a confirmed user. But I don't know. It's pretty dangerous out there. You might want to get a sword, basically. It was definitely really interesting, just in general, looking back at that experience after having not done it for a very long time. So let's keep going through the Zelda experience here and look at another game. This time we'll look at the Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. So this is often regarded as one of the greatest games of all time. And it is a great game, but it's another thing that kind of like registering for an account on Drupal.org, I have not revisited this game in a while either. So there's some additional kind of preamble and some video in the beginning that I'm kind of going to skip past a little bit. And even this will still be a little overlong. So, all right. So, all right, here we are. So it's maybe a touch loud too. All right, so there is this fairy, Navi, who helps navigate you through the game. But he or she or it has to find Link in this case, the boy that they are going to help. And the fate of the entire world depends on them. So there's this cool little animation here that's flying you through the world of the initial area that you start out in, which is just pretty fun and cool. But also, think back to when this game came out. It was kind of the start of the 3D game era, so I think they probably feel some responsibility to just introduce you to a 3D world in general. There have been games that did it before this, like Mario 64, but it's definitely a different style of game. And he can goofily run into a fence as well. But definitely a lot of time in the beginning of this game where you're not in control of the game or your character. Finally we see Link, and he's asleep in bed, conveniently. And the Great Deku Tree wants to talk to me. Fantastic. He's trying his best to wake me up. Finally I'm awake. But still not in control of Link. I finally woke up. Just a reminder that the Great Deku Tree asked me to be your partner. They keep saying and highlighting the Great Deku Tree over and over and over. let's get going right now. Awesome, so I can finally move Link around, check out my room, but I'll go outside. Oh, and I get to now see this expansive forest. Or instead, someone is going to run up and shout at me almost immediately. Hello. Alright, so you certainly could just breeze past this person if you wanted to, but they definitely want to talk to me. So first there's some pleasantries about the fact that I have a fairy. I think we've established at this point that I have a fairy. And another reminder that the Great Deku Tree has summoned me. So this is kind of the beginning of the era of game tutorials, and looking back on this, it was really interesting just to see how much they really force you in particular directions and then remind you over and over and over of the different things that you have to do. So I'm going to go try to visit this tree. Oh, cool, I can jump. And I'll talk to this guy, who immediately assumes that I don't have a fairy, but guess what? I have a fairy. And the Great Deku Tree summoned me. Unbelievable. He's very jealous. But I'm not fully equipped. And I need a sword and a shield. And at this point, and there's more of this in this initial area, and obviously we're going to take a break soon, but it starts to kind of stack these objectives on you. I got to find the Deku Tree, but I got to get a sword, and I got to get a shield, and I have to learn how to do this, and I have to learn how to do that. So he reminds me again, I got to get a sword and a shield, so I'll go back and try to find a sword and a shield. I go over here. This person gets my attention and tells me how I can look at her and target her to talk to her. So at this point, you get the idea. So another different approach to introducing you to the world here. And again, I think part of it is because this kind of 3D game was new, but there's this really heavy tutorial area, and there's a lot of you being told and reminded what to do, and quests that stack on top of each other. And really what you do in this initial opening area is they're trying to teach you everything in the entire game, kind of all at once in this one spot. And you know, especially playing the game now, it is a lot and very slow moving. But also, you know, for a game that's potentially had some new mechanics, I can see how they would have maybe taken that direction and why it would potentially make sense. But let's jump over and look at another onboarding experience here. All right. Oh, actually, before we do that, leading into that, there's a YouTube channel called Extra Credits. I don't know if they're actually doing videos anymore, but they do a lot of really great video game kind of analysis videos. And they have one on Tutorials 101, which has a set of rules for game tutorials. So, you know, this is more kind of tutorials now, less so early in the age of tutorials. But so they recommend less text. That initial experience was extremely verbose and text-heavy. No front loading, so they would recommend against trying to teach you every single mechanic in the game all at once, unsurprisingly. And make it fun. You know, for me now, walking through that, it's definitely nowhere near as fun as I thought it was whenever that game came out. I think it might have been 1998 or something. Reinforce learning through play. So it's kind of connected to the whole concept of making it fun. But it shouldn't feel like you're being taught these mechanics. It shouldn't feel like you're working and learning. And the last one is pretty general, but a good reminder to listen to your players. So do play testing, you know, if we're thinking about onboarding experiences for our sites, do user testing and really learn and listen to what people are telling you. It can definitely help you improve your overall onboarding experience. So let's look at another onboarding example. In this case, we're going to look at Slack. How many people here use Slack? A lot of people. Awesome. Slack is often considered and cited as an example of an application that has a great onboarding experience. So it's fun to take a look at Slack. And I found a few examples that had Slack's original onboarding experience alongside some tweaks that they made to it. So we're going to look at a little bit of the before and after as we go through this. When you land after registering for Slack, you're given this page that welcomes you to Slack and explains a little bit about what Slack is and what Slack wants to do. So that was before. And there's definitely, although there is this welcome message, there's still a lot of stuff on screen. And afterwards, they actually simplified this landing to this. It just says, welcome. Slack is a messaging app, which is really all you need to know. And it kind of faded out all of the other elements of the user interface, which is nice and clean and focused. So going back to the earlier version, there were these hotspots that got you into a little bit of a click tour. I'm sure that's also a common approach to onboarding in an application, to kind of force you through this tour of what the app does. And if you click on one of those hotspots, which I believe you could ignore for as long as you wanted, so sometimes if you decide to jump right in, they would still be there. But then you get into your click tour, gives you information, you step through all of the different parts of the app. And now that was simplified as well. So A, it's a little bit less verbose, and B, I believe it immediately forces you right into that click tour. You can't let it hang out and wait to do it at a later date. But hopefully it's a little bit more of a streamlined process. And then the other thing that people remember about the Slack onboarding experience, I don't know if you guys remember it, having gone through it perhaps a while ago, is that you're onboarded by Slack bots, which is really fun and cool. The first time you go through it, you're like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. But also, it definitely doesn't really feel like an onboarding experience. It doesn't feel like setup. It doesn't feel like work. It's just a cool little example of what Slack is and how it works. And at the end of it, you're all set up and onboarded, which is pretty rad. So the Wii games in the Zelda franchise, we'll take a quick stop over there. We're not going to play them, but there's just a few things in this era of Zelda games that I want to talk about. So there were two games for the Wii, Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. And these games really kind of doubled down on the overall kind of onboarding process and just the general mechanics of like what a Zelda game is. The process got really kind of cemented with these games in a way that I think makes these games potentially not as fun as some of the other games in the Zelda franchise. But there is a boatload of tutorial up front in these games to really get out to the point where you're in the larger world and playing the game and have all the tools that you need. It literally is a couple of hours. And searching for an image for this slide, I came across this one, and I had completely forgotten about this because it's so ridiculous. In Twilight Princess, one of the things that you have to do is herd a bunch of goats. And you get this exciting goat-in message when you get a goat into the barn. Sure, it's teaching you how to ride and control an animal, but man, I have to spend a bunch of time herding 10 goats in this game. I want to go explore and find treasure and stuff. And so also there's the concept of dungeons in the Zelda games. We really aren't going to get into any of them in what we play, because they're usually a little bit later in the game. But basically it's an area, like an underground area, or maybe a castle that you go into. Your end objective is to defeat the boss and open up and unlock the dungeon. Along the way, you'll get keys to open up different areas in the dungeon and often get items that you can use in your quest. And a common thing that became a thing that happened in all of the dungeons in these Zelda games in this era is that there's a key item, not actually a key, but a key item that you get part of the way through the dungeon. It's specific to that dungeon, and then once you get this item, like say a boomerang or the hook shot or bombs or something like that, first off, you need to use the item immediately to get out of the room that you're in. And then after that, the item is really the solution to most puzzles that you encounter. So if you get the hook shot, you're in the hook shot dungeon, and you use the hook shot to fix things. And then it's also almost always used to defeat the boss that you get to at the end of the dungeon as well. So it does give you a feeling of progression and getting new skills as a player, but it is actually surprisingly linear what it forces you to do, because you have to go to a dungeon to get this thing in this particular order so you can use it in this dungeon and potentially other dungeons. And then another thing that I just thought was incredibly interesting when I stumbled upon this is specifically in Twilight Princess. When I played that game, I found it really boring. I got most of the way through it. I think I got like 60 hours into it or something, and stopped at the very end. But I didn't really know exactly why I thought it was so boring. And as it turns out, while there are a bunch of different dungeons with different dungeon mechanics and different layouts, the actual way that you traverse through all of the dungeons in this game is the same. So this is your general path through the Forest Temple. And then Arbiter's Grounds is actually the same thing. And the Lakebed Temple is a little bit different in that the boss is in the middle, but you still go through this exact same structure. And the City in the Sky is like this. And most of them do follow the same path. So, I don't know exactly why it had to be this way. As someone who developed software, I think maybe it was a deadline. I don't know. But it's weird. But it was really amazing to find out that the dungeons all follow this structure in common. And that, I feel like that probably contributed why I thought the game was kind of a slog. So now there is the Breath of the Wild, which is what inspired me to try to put this presentation together to begin with. It is also regarded as a really incredible, potentially one of the best games of all time. And I'm not done with it, but I've played quite a bit of it. Really love the game. But I was really struck by the process that they used to introduce you to the game world. It's a much more open game compared to the other Zelda games. And we'll talk a little bit about how the structure changed. But it really threw away a lot of those old, tired conventions from the previous Zelda games. It's a lot closer to like an open world game where you can kind of follow whatever quests you like. But the way that they introduce you into the game world, it's pretty amazing. And as I read more about it, it just became more and more interesting to me. So as we've been doing, we'll actually jump in and just see the beginning of the game in this case. All right. Anyway, so we're going to dive in and play the beginning of Breath of the Wild, and also take a look at how that process differs compared to the other Zelda games. All right, so every single time I've done this, prepping for this talk, I'm absolutely horrified that I'm going to delete my main game save, but I made sure that I'm on the right account here. What's up with that? Hopefully that's not too annoying. So I don't know why they decided to use such ridiculously small font here, but good on Nintendo. So a little bit of video preamble as we get started. But I definitely find this a lot more immediately engaging than the other, be it crawls or video sections in the other games. Hopefully we can still hear that. So interesting, they initially give you a view of the world through Link's eyes. to kind of introduce you to the world here. And then we see Link in his surprisingly modern boxer shorts, waking up. But you know, it could be 20 years of developments in video game technology, but I don't know, it's a lot moodier and engaging and feels a lot more like a movie, which definitely helps the experience quite a bit. Weird, creepy, alien-seeming room. So obviously a subtle hint here that I'm supposed to go interact with that thing. It's really interesting to see the different ways they get you to go to something or to go interact with something. I really love how they have just these subtle indications of what the controls are. You don't have to go talk to a fairy or get yelled at by somebody to learn how to speak to somebody. I just know that the left stick makes me move. And I get up this thing and I can press A to examine it. And I apparently have an iPhone of some kind. It is the Sheikah Slate.
It will help guide you after the long slumber.
Mysterious tablet. It is kind of funny how much it looks like a tablet or an iPhone. So I picked up the slate, and now this door opens, and I'm being drawn in this direction. And I do think it's a little ridiculous that there just happen to be these treasure chests hanging out here. I wish there was some other way they could have done this, but it is funny though that I don't have shoes on and I kick it and I hurt my foot. So now I have pants. Fantastic. So now, just when I'm at the point where I would want to open my inventory, it tells me how to do it. Pretty subtly, I just hit the plus sign. And I'm in my inventory. I don't have to go through a big, long thing about how the inventory works. I'm smart enough now, I can hit A and say that I'm going to equip these pants. Thank God that was awkward. So now there's another treasure chest. And I get an old shirt. It doesn't force me into explaining how the inventory works again. I know that now. And it also leaves the option up to me. I'm going to go shirtless, because that's fun. But with this, and also most of the things that happen in this game, you can choose to do or not do pretty much whatever you want, which is awesome. But even playing through it now, I wonder if the fact that the first one they put you into the inventory and the second one they don't, also puts you in a situation where you can realize, I don't have to put my shirt on. Wow, that's amazing. So there's this flashing thing again. I've learned that these are things that I can interact with. And I take my ancient or possibly futuristic iPhone and hold it up to it. I've authenticated. So now this big door opens. Kind of like when I open my eyes, big fancy shining light. No pressure, just the fate of the world on my shoulders. Okay, so now I can most likely leave this area. Again, subtle hints as far as what the controls are. I can jump. I can sprint. Good to know. How's this going to work? What's with this big rock? Oh, it tells me that I can climb. And I see that I can just climb up on things, which ends up being a pretty important mechanic in the game. And how you learn it is just by coming up to your first thing that you can climb, and climbing. And then this is a pretty badass way to introduce you to the scope of the world. And then you go out on this cliff here, and you see this giant expanse, and wonder to yourself, like, how much of this am I going to actually be able to see? When am I going to get down there? But it's pretty awesome. And then the camera shifts around here, and again, there's something that draws our eyes, that fire, and cut to this weird, mysterious dude. So, I am going to go interact with that guy, but one thing that's awesome about this game is I don't have to. If I wanted to, I could just go over to the edge here, jump to my death if I wanted to, or climb down now that I know how to climb, and just go wherever I want. But eventually you're probably going to have to talk to that guy. But also, I see this thing with a white spark on top of it. Go up to that. Don't know what it is, but I hit A to take it. And I find out that it's a weapon. And I can use my weapon by hitting Y. So what I love about this is that you're not forced through a bunch of tutorial in the beginning. Basically, at the moments that you need to know a mechanic or might want to know a mechanic is when it tells you, which is pretty cool. So I can go grab that mushroom, but we're on the clock here.
And he's got shoes. I find that amazing.
Yep. When you put on pants, you automatically get shoes. That's what happens to me every morning.
A twofer.
All right, so I'm going to just show just a little bit more. I'll talk to this guy. And he's very mysterious, but he knocks us for not wearing a shirt, which is pretty cool. So he introduces the fact that this is the Great Plateau, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. Then he draws our attention to another area. And this is kind of a common thing in the game, and we'll see some other ways that they do this. But basically, from another vantage point, oftentimes high up, you see something cool off in the distance, and you're inspired to just go look and find out what it is. And as a result, cool things happen. All right, so there's more I could do with that old guy if I want, but I instead see this really cool axe. So I'll get this axe. And now I have two weapons. So it tells me how I would change weapons. I can hit the right triangle to switch between weapons. And as you could probably imagine from what we've seen so far, they probably introduced this mechanic because I'm going to need it. So here comes this bad guy who hops out of nowhere. And I know how to swing my weapon, so my tree branch is damaged. Wait, what? Oh no, weapons can break in this game. But I know how to quickly change to a new weapon because they just told me that mechanic. And I will just chop this guy in the face with an axe. So, if I continue on, I'll eventually hear from that voice in the beginning, and she'll tell me to go somewhere else. Poor Drupal job, sorry. That's a good way to end that. But especially going through this a few times, so I played through this section probably about 3 times again, preparing for this. It's still fun to do now, but I think it is really amazing how they only introduce you to play mechanics either when you want them or just before it thinks you're going to need them, which is really, really cool. So there's a few more things I want to talk about, so we'll swap back over. So cleaning up with a few last things now that we've got our last game demo in there. I did a Google image search for the Great Plateau because I wanted one to represent the Great Plateau, and this one came up. Slow your roll Google image search, but I'll use this, okay. So the remainder, the Great Plateau is the introductory section of the game. It's going to take you a few hours to go through, but it's really self-directed. There are certain things that you need to do to get off of the Great Plateau, but mostly you can go explore and find whatever you want. But there's a few other things that happen here. One is the concept of these towers is introduced. It's actually the next thing that was going to happen. The voice was going to tell me to go over a certain point, and a tower would pop up out of nowhere. But these towers introduce you to a few things. One, illuminates sections on the map that helps you explore, but it also reinforces that general concept of getting up to high ground and looking around and just finding something interesting and something cool and going there as a way to kind of proceed in your quests. And it's also just a really fun way to play the game. So it introduces the towers and opens up the map, and then it also introduces you to the concept of these shrines. So in the previous Zelda games, there were the dungeons, and the dungeons were large, and they would take an hour or two maybe to get through, and it would be typically a single sitting kind of thing. In this initial section, the Great Plateau, there are 4 shrines, and the shrines themselves are basically little mini puzzle dungeons, a lot more digestible. There's a lot of reasons why they might have made this change. One, maybe just the general dungeon idea was getting stale, but the Switch can be used on a television, but also as a portable console. So maybe it made a lot more sense to have something that was really bite-sized. But the first 4 shrines in the Great Plateau each give you basically a new tool, like the key items in the dungeons. One is bombs, another one is magnetic ability, ice, and then there's something called stasis that lets you freeze things like in time. And those 4 things would typically be things that you would get through dungeon progression in the game. But instead, they just give you all of these things right at the beginning of the game. And there are still other abilities you can get, but for the most part, they give you all of the tools right in this initial section and then turn you out on the world, which gives you a lot more control, makes the game a lot more interesting, and also is another thing that just kind of turns some of those Zelda conventions on its head. And then the thing that I think is the most interesting about this, and potentially the most applicable to like non-video game onboarding experiences, is the concept of the world in miniature here. So this is the map of the Great Plateau. And another good question, who has actually played this game? Cool. I recommend it, by the way. So the Great Plateau, this is a map of the Great Plateau. When you play through it, it feels pretty large. And then eventually you're given an item, I guess I'll stay non-spoilery, but lets you get off of the Great Plateau and see the rest of the world. It also helps with exploration in general throughout the game. And then you realize that the map is a lot larger than you think. So this is zooming on a little bit, but this is actually the full world map. And you can see the Great Plateau section here, but as we zoom out, like you can barely even tell where that is in the grand scheme of things. So what felt like a pretty large section of the map, you realize is actually a pretty small section of what you can explore, which is cool. But the other thing that's really interesting is that the entire experience that you have in this first couple of hours on the Great Plateau is really just a small version of the game as a whole. So it's like a larger version of, potentially 100-hour version of that first couple hour experience. So you're finding the towers and the shrines, and there's 120 shrines in the whole game and all that. There's also something that's close to dungeons. They're called the Divine Beasts, and there are 4 of them. So like you had the 4 shrines that you had to go through in that initial section, there are these 4 larger dungeons that do give you some additional abilities. So it's really interesting that there is this still very fun and easy to digest and understand experience that gives you the experience of the whole game, and in doing that sets you up for playing the rest of the game. And the other cool thing is you can still do whatever you want. So you can get off of this initial section and just go right to the final boss if you want, and probably get your butt handed to you. So let's look at another couple of onboarding experiences with our last few minutes here. So one, as I started looking at onboarding experiences for this presentation, that came up a lot was Duolingo, which is a site that helps you learn languages. Has anybody used this site before? Awesome, awesome, awesome. So this kept coming up as a great onboarding experience, and now that I've went through it, I would agree. And I think it also has some things in common with what makes the Breath of the Wild player onboarding experience different and successful. So you land on this page, and you get a big Get Started button. There is a place to log in, but instead you can just click Get Started. Sure, I want to learn I want to learn a language for free forever. And then you can pick from the language that you want to learn. There's a bunch of them. And then the next thing, you get to choose a daily goal. Okay, I'll just go with the one that you recommended here. That sounds good. But if I wanted to be casual, I could be casual. And learning French, I thought this was actually really cool in that you can pick basically how you want to be introduced to this app. If you want to start with the basics, or you know a lot of French and you just want to do a placement test. So you can basically pick the onboarding experience that is appropriate for you, which is awesome.
That must have changed since I started it.
Yeah, I actually did this
Huh.
today.
That would've been nice. Oh, yeah, that's changed since I started it.
So you go through and you actually start using the application and getting asked some questions about French translations and cool little app to have these exercises. The one thing that I would knock this for is that I did get part of the way through it and was like, I get what this does. This is a cool app. Maybe I'll just step out and see what happens if I leave this experience. And it tells me that I would lose all of my progress in this session if I quit. For something that has such an elegant onboarding experience, I'm surprised that that was possible. Seems like I could handle that a little bit better. But anyway, I powered through it, and then I got experience points. Keep in mind, I still don't have an account on this site. It's just giving me a really easy way to learn about what this app is and why I would like it. And then it tells me that I'm now 5% fluent in French, which I can tell you is a lie. But pretty enticing. And so, experience points. I'm 5% fluent in French. Hey, do you want to save your progress and create an account? Which you still don't have to do. You could decide to create a profile later. But, I can be cynical about the fact that it told me that I'm 5% fluent in French. But I went through a brief experience of the app that potentially represents the whole app as a whole. I feel pretty good about myself because I learned some French. I can't really think of a time that I'd be more open to creating an account. And their sign-up form is really simple. And then once I do that, I have an account, I've got my progress saved, I can go into other training sessions. It's, again, it's kind of that, the app in miniature here. So I thought that was, in fact, a really cool onboarding experience. That gives me some flexibility. It lets me pick exactly what I want to do in onboarding, what I think is appropriate. Lets me lead it a little bit. And then another one that popped to mind that I went through recently, I'm a big to-do list guy, and I've been using the Things apps for a while, and Things 3 came out. So how the iOS app onboards you, I thought was pretty cool as well, in that it gives you a sample project. And by stepping through the to-dos in the sample projects, you can learn about the app. So I tap this to-do, and it explains what a to-do is and what I can do with it. And there's one later on that says I can swipe to use the different shortcuts, and it lets you try it out, reschedule things. But the other thing that I found that was great about this is that, the app costs a decent amount of money. So before I went and bought the new version on literally every single device I have, because I use it everywhere I can, I wanted to make sure that I liked the new design. And I was able to do just enough of the tutorial to get a feel for it and realize that it was a nice upgrade and go get it set up on my other devices. But I could put this tutorial down and just come back to it later. And in the meantime, I imported my old to-dos, I started adding new stuff, and then either when I had questions about how to do things or just like, I wonder how the rest of Things 3 works, I could just hop right back in here and go through the tutorial. And I finished the thing, but I finished it on my own time. And it's another onboarding experience that I think is really effective in that it gives you a little slice of the whole application. You can kind of consume it as you feel appropriate, and it prepares you to use the whole larger app long term. So we're just about out of time. So let's collect all of our treasures and figure out what we learned. So when we played through the beginning of The Legend of Zelda, that's definitely a situation where I feel now maybe you need to do a little bit more to guide people during the onboarding process. It's probably not going to be as successful if you just drop them to their login dashboard and don't give them any information. Or even if you don't have an authenticated experience, there probably is more that you can do to help them understand why they would want to use your site and where they can find the relevant information. But at the same time, it can feel frustrating if you are brought down a very specific, verbose path, and maybe you don't want to do the entire onboarding experience all at once, or maybe it's just too heavy-handed. And the big thing I take away from looking at the Ocarina of Time again is that the process really needs to be enjoyable. Going through that again, it definitely didn't feel fun. And that would remind me of a situation where I'm onboarded to an app, and it just feels like so much work to get through the original tutorial, like a click tour, and like maybe I just bail altogether. And then for Breath of the Wild, the general flexibility that affords is pretty amazing. But in general, as we kind of hit on a few times before this, that concept of giving somebody a easily digestible, potentially experience that they can control themselves, that represents your whole app or your whole site or your whole experience, I think is really effective. And there are a lot of cool new modern onboarding experiences that do that. And the other thing, not to bring this slide up again, but I believe there have probably been, I know this is a challenging problem for us to address in the Drupal community, and I think there may have been initiatives around improving this experience in the past, but rather than just feel weird about how it is, it's definitely a situation where maybe there's things we can do to contribute and try to help improve this experience on Drupal.org as well. So definitely something for us as a community to look into, because I really think changing this could make a difference. Also, I would appreciate any feedback on this talk, especially if you thought it was useful, what you think about a video game talk at a Drupal camp, that sort of stuff. So I would certainly love to hear any feedback you have, and good luck on your quest. Thanks.